The purpose of this video is to illustrate the PM Pro preventive maintenance software. And to begin with, we'll set up a new piece of equipment from scratch. And so we'll go up here to the menu item called File, and from the drop-down list, click on Equipment. And we'll set up a piece of equipment. So first of all, we'll put in an equipment ID, which can be alphanumeric. So for example, IRP. And we can also set up the maintenance interval. The maintenance interval would be from the last maintenance, we would add whatever the maintenance interval is, and that will tell us when the next due date is for that piece of equipment. We can do it in days, weeks, months, years, whatever, or meter count actually. We'll leave it at days, and we'll leave it at 30 days. However, we're sort of at the very beginning stages of setting up a piece of equipment, so we have to give it a starting point to add 32, and that's what this field is all about. So we can set this date to whatever we want. Right now it's showing the current system date, which is May 9, 2017. But let's say we want a piece of equipment to be next due on perhaps May 15th, 2017. To do that, we would need to add 30 days to this sort of starting point, and we'll make the starting point, we'll backdate this. We'll make this April 15th. And when you do that, it'll add 30 days to this starting date, and the next due date will be May 15th, 2017. So if we go ahead and click on the Save Toolbar button, it's now telling us that the next due date is May 15th, 2017. And so the rest of the fields are all optional. This is all we really need is this maintenance interval, the starting date, or startup date, and the equipment ID. And we're done. We're basically done. Now, we're going to illustrate some of the other elements of this software, but for all intents and purposes, we've set up a piece of equipment from scratch. Now, the other elements of the equipment detail would be things like category, if you wish to sort of categorize the piece of equipment, and one can generate a list, a drop-down list of various categories depending on what you do in your place. We've set up one which has two entries. One is a press and one is a paint type of piece of equipment. So we'll click on press. The description will be let's say a 10-ton press, and the location and area would be fields that you can fill in if you wish to. So for example, location, let's say it's plant 3, and the area within plant 3, let's say it's an aisle 2. And the serial number and model number will leave blank, comment will leave blank. Available for use, as the name implies, the equipment is available for use. If it's not available for use, you would uncheck this. And over here, we'll leave the estimated maintenance time out of here, because we really don't know at this point what it is, what it should be, or the technician. If you know what it is, who the technician is, you can enter that, and so on. And that's pretty much it for this segment of the equipment detail. Now, there are other things that we can do if we wish to. One can set up, aside from the fields that you see on the main screen of equipment detail, you can set up what are called custom fields. Now, those custom fields that we're going to set up here would be unique to your company. So, for example, let's say you want to record manufacturer. And you might also want to record the rate at which the press is punching out product. So we would then enter the actual manufacturer name in this field, and the rate at which it's pumping out pieces. Let's say it's 35 pieces. So that's the custom field. Now this custom field, as I mentioned, could be unique to this piece of equipment, or it could be more of a global type of field. So if you want later, elsewhere in the software, you can set these custom fields so they're global, so that it'll always say under the field name, manufacturer and rate, if you set up as global. We'll go ahead and save that information as well. Then the instructions of how to maintain this piece of equipment, it can either be manually typed in for every piece of equipment, or if you have number of 10-ton presses that are the same manufacturer, for example, we can set up what's called a global instruction, which would mean that we would type in the instructions once, and then we could reference that instruction for each of the 10-ton presses that exist. We happen to have set up one global instruction in our system ahead of time, and it's called PM-01, so I'll just go double click on that, and it retrieves the instruction associated with PM-01 and assigns it to this piece of equipment. If I click on the save button now, this global instruction is linked to this piece of equipment. And then the last thing that I want to sort of show you is the tab called Picture. One can take a picture of the entire piece of equipment if they wish, or a segment of their piece of equipment that's going to get maintained, and assign it and show it with this piece of equipment. So to, for example, show the entire press, I happen to have a picture of a press. I just go scroll down to my folder here called PM Pictures, and then double click on the actual picture file, the JPEG file, and I'll save that. And so now this piece of equipment has this picture associated with it. And we're going to look at this piece of equipment once every 30 days. Next time it's due is May 15, 2017. And that's pretty much it for setting up a piece of equipment. So I'll just close that out. Now, in addition to the main piece of equipment that's going to get maintained, in this case every 30 days, there may be a way for you to break down the piece of equipment into various elements like electrical, mechanical, and so on, which don't have to be maintained on such a regular basis as, let's say, every 30 days. Let's say you want to look at the electrical portion of this piece of equipment maybe once a year, and the mechanical, certain mechanical things like changing oil or stuff like that, maybe once every 6 months. So to do that, we would go back and retrieve our piece of equipment. And we only have one piece of equipment in here, but to see a list of all our equipments, we would click on this Find button, and it would list all our equipments. Again, we only have this one piece of equipment. But let's say we want to add a subsystem to this piece of equipment, and so we click on the Add button, and we're going to call this subsystem, if we're interested in, for example, looking at the electrical elements related to this piece of equipment, we would call it electrical. And it retains all the information that we had from our main piece of equipment, but instead of maintaining it once every 30 days, let's say we want to do this once a year. So we'll change the units to year and change this to 1. And so now this piece of equipment will be due for electrical type of activities once a year. And you would also change the instructions. You can change the instructions to electrical related instructions like checking fuses and checking wires and so on. And the picture can also be focused more on the electrical aspect of the piece of equipment. So we'll go ahead and save that. And now we'll close this. And so now if we look in here, we actually have 2 records in our system. There's the main piece of equipment, and then there's the electrical component that, or subsystem, that we also want to look at. And if we look at each of these separately, we see that the subsystem is going to be due 1 year. In this case, it happened to pick up the date, the start date, as the current system date, which was May 9, 2017. Add 1 year to it, and it's showing the next due date as being May 9th, 2018, so 1 year from now. But the next time we actually maintain this piece of equipment and record it, whatever date that is, it'll use that last date, add a year to that, to calculate the next due date. So this is a one-time kind of deal where it uses this date, adds 1 year to it. And so we now have basically our two pieces of equipment. One's electrical. It's really the same piece of equipment. One's electrical, and one is the main piece of equipment that's due every 30 days. So this is all I want to say about this particular topic, and we'll continue with the next part of this illustration, looking at certain reports. How do you record a maintenance activity? How do you record an unscheduled maintenance activity? And so we'll continue with that in a moment. The next thing we'll look at is some of the reports that are in the system. We'll come back to this a little later, but just to illustrate some of the key reports that might be of interest, let's go over to the menu item called Report. And from the drop-down list, you can either go straight to these various reports that you see on the drop-down list, or we can filter a little bit and manipulate what we want to report on. Specifically, if we go to Report Options, there are a number of things that we can filter on. For example, we can filter on various field names, as you see here. So for example, if we're interested in a particular location and only that equipment that would be found in that location, we could put in the from and the to location. So for example, if it's the paint department, you can type in paint in the from field and paint in the to field, and it would only retrieve those equipments that are related to the paint location. But more than likely, you'll be more interested in knowing what pieces of equipment are due for maintenance on a specific date or in a date range. And for that purpose, we click on the tab called Range, and we select the option button Enter Date Range, and it shows you the from and the to dates. At this point, we happen to be in the month of June as a default, but let's say we were interested in the month of May. So we'll go from May 1st, 2017 to May 30th, 2017. And if I click on Apply here, that goes back to the database and retrieves all the equipments that are related to that period of time. And then I just close this out and I go back to my menu report, and the first thing that might be of interest is to see a list of those gauges that are due, sorry, not gauges, equipments that are due in the month of May. And that list is pretty small. It's basically what we've entered to this point, this piece of equipment, which happens to be due, if we scroll over just a bit here, on the 15th of May, as we know from our previous setup of this piece of equipment. And we can print this if we wish to a printer. We can also export it to an external document. It could be a Word document, it could be an Excel spreadsheet, it could be a text file, whatever is relevant. You could take that Word document, if you export it to a Word document, and perhaps attach it to email and send it to maybe the maintenance supervisor if that's who needs to see this report, and so on. So we'll just close this particular report out now, and we'll look at one or two more reports at this point anyhow. In addition to just a list of those equipments that are due, we can also generate what's called a work order, which is, basically a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that you would give to the maintenance person, and they would more or less follow the requirements of maintaining that piece of equipment. So this happens to be a scheduled maintenance, and it's due on the 15th of 2017. But if you had unscheduled maintenances, you could also generate work orders. Like if you had a breakdown in a piece of equipment and you want to do some maintenance, you can schedule that as well. And of course, there are some spaces and fields that can be filled in by the maintenance person. All of this is optional. the instructions on how to maintain the piece of equipment, as we had seen earlier when we set this piece of equipment up, are described here. And there's some sign-off information and so on. So this is the maintenance work order, which may or may not be of use to a company, but it's there if you want it. We'll close that out as well. We'll go to report, and the rest of these reports we'll talk about a little later in this video, but for now, those are the two reports that are probably the most important. The what pieces of equipment are due, and if you are interested in a work order to be generated, the work order. We can also look at the due calendar, which is pretty much just a regular calendar. And if we go back to, let's say, instead of June 2017, we look at May of 2017, we again see in a more visual way what's due in the month of May. The only thing that's due is this particular piece of equipment on the 15th. And so we'll close that out. And perhaps the last thing we'll look at just at this point is the equipment list report. The equipment list report is a list of all the equipment that are in the system currently. And this particular list is rather small as well, because we only have two pieces of equipment. Specifically, we only have one piece of equipment where we maintain the main part of that equipment once every 30 days, I believe is what we set it up for, and this one is due on May 15th. And then we look at the electrical portion of that piece of equipment once every year, and so that's due on the, as we saw before, on the 9th of May in 2018. And so this list just gives you more or less an inventory of all your equipment in your plant. And we'll close that out as well. So that's sort of a quick summary of the various reports that would be perhaps most commonly used. And we'll look at the other reports later on. At this point, we'll stop with the reports and we'll look at how to record in the system, in the database, a maintenance activity. To record a maintenance activity on a piece of equipment, we would click on the toolbar button for transactions, which happens to be this one here, or we could click on File, and from the drop-down list, click on Transaction. That brings up a window called Transactions, and it's for this particular piece of equipment. If you were interested in some other piece of equipment, you could click on the toolbar button that has this Find Equipment Record title, and that gives a list of all the equipments that are in the system, which aren't too many, just what we entered so far. You could either double click on the piece of equipment that's of interest to you, or you can type in the first few characters of that equipment ID and then click on the Find button and it would retrieve that particular piece of equipment. But we'll stick to the one that we have here at the moment. And in addition to all of this, you see the history of activity on that piece of equipment in terms of various maintenance activities, both preventive and unscheduled. There happens to be nothing here because we haven't done anything yet. But as time progresses and maintenance activities are recorded, this will start growing. We also see when the equipment is due and the last maintenance date, which hasn't happened yet because we haven't actually done anything. So let's go ahead and do a new transaction for this piece of equipment. That's done by clicking on this toolbar button called New. That brings up a transaction detail window where we can record the various elements related to the maintenance activity. The first thing we can record is the date that the maintenance activity occurred, and I'm going to change this to, it was due on May 15th, so let's say we actually got there a little earlier and we did it on the 14th of May. The activity was preventive, in other words, it's something that we actually had in our plan, and we can record things like who maintained the piece of equipment. Let's say it was Bill, and how much the labor cost was for Bill. Let's say it was $35. And any other costs that we might have incurred, and the time that was spent doing the maintenance. So let's say we spent a half an hour doing the maintenance. Now this is all optional, but it is kind of useful to record this information because there are some reports in the system that take this raw data and then generate some managerial reports that you can have a look at, like how much are we spending on a piece of equipment, how much time it's taking to maintain a piece of equipment, and so on. The description here, there are 5 lines of description. You can say, for this particular one, let's just say all is good. And if there was someone that had come in, for example, from some external maintenance vendor type of person coming in and doing the maintenance, and they gave you a piece of paper or some sort of document, like a PDF document, you could link that external document into this particular record by clicking on the link button. The rest of this stuff, idle time and so on, and downtime reasons and repair are more related to unscheduled maintenances, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but let's finish up here. And to do that, we click on the apply button. So now in our list of transaction history, we see one entry here, which is the one we just entered, and as we can see, we've got the description, who did it, and the date of the actual maintenance activity, and the type of maintenance was, in this case, preventive. We could illustrate an unscheduled maintenance. Let's say a machine breaks down for whatever reason, just by going back in and recording the unscheduled event. But I'd like to show you maybe a more formal approach, which is to actually set up the unscheduled maintenance so that we can generate a work order and give that work order to the maintenance person and make it a lot more structured. So if we click on File, and from the drop-down list go to Work Order, that pulls up a window called Work Orders Unscheduled. And again, we're dealing with this piece of equipment. If we had some other piece of equipment that we want to deal with, we would click on the Find button and retrieve the one that we're interested in. And let's say this particular unscheduled maintenance where the piece of equipment broke down, let's say it happened on the 18th of May 2017, and the status is probably still outstanding. The priority, you can by the way, you can set these names in the drop-down list to whatever you want. There's a part in the software that allows you to make those settings for this status drop-down list and for this priority drop-down list. Let's just say it's high. Priority is high, and we would like this to be completed in roughly 1 day. So that would mean on the 19th of May, we would like this unscheduled maintenance to be completed, which is pretty generous, I guess. And let's say this time it's Joe who's going to be assigned to do it. And if we wish, we can record why the piece of equipment broke down. Let's say there was some operator misuse of the piece of equipment, and as a result, the equipment needs to be shut down. And let's say we can type in the instructions here. We can say pretty much whatever we want. Let's just say bearing broken, needs to be replaced. And that's pretty much how you would set up, let's say, an unscheduled work order. And you click on the Apply button, and you can see now in our list of unscheduled work orders, we've got this particular one sitting here. And we can build up this list. Hopefully this list doesn't get too big and things get maintained on a regular basis without things breaking down. But when it does break down, this is how you would sort of handle that. Now you can generate, if you wish, right from this particular screen, the work order. So if we click on Report, we get a work order. This time it's for an unscheduled type of activity. similar to the other work order where you have all these various fields. And the instructions in this case is what we just typed in. And so this would be given to the maintenance person, in this case Joe, and he would go and go ahead and fix the piece of equipment. So that's the unscheduled work order. We can close all of this out, and just for your information, we might be interested in knowing what pieces of equipment that are unscheduled might be due in the month of May. So it's a similar type of setup here. You go to Report Options. First of all, let's reset whatever was set in the filtering portion of the software. We are interested in, this time, unscheduled activities, so we would select that option button. And we're also interested in the month of May. So we would type in, for example, May 1st, 2017, all the way to, let's say, May 31st, 2017. Then we click on the Apply button, and this now goes back to the database and retrieves all those unscheduled maintenances for the month of May. And if we close this out and go back to Report and look at the unscheduled work order list, we would see all those unscheduled work orders that are currently active. In this case, we only have one, and pretty much the information we've just entered. We'd like it completed by on the 19th of May. It actually happened on the 18th, and so that takes care of the list. Now, once Joe goes out there and fixes things, we can record that in the transaction section of the software. So we go back here, and again, we can either get in through here or through File, Transactions. Well, let's go here. So to actually record the unscheduled maintenance, we click on the New Toolbar button. And this time, we're going to say that we got to the piece of equipment, although it happened on the 18th and we had until the 19th to actually fix it. Let's say Joe was pretty efficient and he got to it on the 18th. And it's unscheduled, so we'll select that option button. And you can either use this list of unscheduled work orders that we just set up and use that to sort of populate the transaction, or you can just manually type it in if you wish. But since we already have it, let's just double click on this one. And so it picks up, who's doing the maintenance and other pieces of information that might have been set up with this particular unscheduled maintenance. And we can record, just like we did before, things like labor costs. So let's say we spent 1.5 hours on this. And let's say this actually cost us $125. Sorry, my mistake. The labor cost was $125, and the other cost, we have to get a bearing and whatever. Let's say it cost $35. And the maintenance time, we can either enter maintenance time here for later reports, as I mentioned, for managerial reports. So let's say it took 1.5 hours to do all this stuff. And then the idle time, until Joe actually got to it, from the time that it happened until he got to it, let's say there was a sort of a 4-hour window where the piece of equipment was down and wasn't really looked at for 4 hours. And so the reason for that idle time is that Joe was busy, and so we record that as well. Now, optional to all of this would be to record the date that the piece of equipment went down and the time it went down, and the date and the time that it came back up. And so this is going to be used for a performance indicator that is kind of useful. It's called mean time between failures, and another performance indicator called mean time to repair. Those two pieces of statistics, as you build up history for unscheduled maintenances, will give you an idea of, for example, the average time between a failure, between an unscheduled maintenance. So if that's very frequent, then you would probably want to do some brainstorming and figure out why that's happening and try and correct that. In a similar way, the mean time to repair is once you've got a piece of equipment down and the mean time to repair is really a large number. If it becomes a large number, that's not good. And so you want to figure out why that's happening and sort of make sure that if something does go down, that you fix it as fast as possible. So just to illustrate this, let's say we record the point at which the piece of equipment went down, which was on the 18th of May 2017. And let's say the time was, let's say, 8 o'clock in the morning. By the way, the units of time could be just the standard thing like AM and PM, or you can put in military time like, 800 hours, whatever. And then, as it turns out, Joe got to this piece of equipment on the same day. So we'll put in, it was back up and running on the same day on the 18th. And let's say it was at 9:30 a.m. that it was back up and running. So that takes care of pretty much, actually one other thing here, there's some additional information that can be recorded. The downtime, you can generate a list of downtime reason codes, and this will also be used in some managerial reports that are available in the software. But let's just say that in this case, this is what happened actually. The bearing was broken, so we'll just double click on that one. That's the reason for the downtime. And the parts that you used and repair can also be recorded. We're not going to get into that as to what we did because over here in the description, it picked up from the previous place where we set up this unscheduled maintenance, the reason for the maintenance, for the unscheduled maintenance, it's misuse. And you can elaborate on this if you wish, or we can just leave it alone. We'll leave it alone. And the same idea as we saw in just regular preventive maintenance, you can link an external document if you have one. So now let's go ahead and click on the apply button. And we see in our transaction history now, there are two entries. One is a preventive maintenance and the other one is the unscheduled maintenance. And this list will grow as time progresses. Hopefully it'll be mostly preventive type of stuff. But you have everything here displayed. And that's pretty much, oh yeah, one other thing. As you start entering unscheduled maintenance activities, you'll start building up this performance indicator as we saw before. And this is in units of of hours. So we don't have enough information to generate a mean time between failure. We need at least 2 unscheduled maintenances to sort of generate this mean time between failure. But we do have some information related to mean time to repair, and it's rounding. It really took an hour and a half, but we're just saying in hours what it is, so it's 1 hour. And we'd like this number to be as small as possible, and this number to be as big as possible as time progresses. So that's pretty much the way we record information, and we'll leave that as is for now. Okay, so we've looked at some of the reports earlier, and I'd like to spend a little bit of time on the remaining reports. So we'll go over here to report, and the first report that I'd like to have a look at is the history report. And this gives you the activity for a piece of equipment. So this is our piece of equipment, and I actually added a few more records as well. But you can see the various line items here. For example, the very first one is a scheduled maintenance, the date that that maintenance was actually performed, who did it, some costs that occurred, and any comments that were documented in the transaction. So we have both scheduled and unscheduled type of maintenances and their appropriate pieces of information. This could be for every piece of equipment that's in the system that has any activity on it. You can also see when the last maintenance, the scheduled maintenance was, and also when the next due date is for that piece of equipment. So that's the history report, and we'll close that, go back to report. Now we talked about this mean time between failure and mean time to repair. Basically you can get a report for all the equipment in the system. I added a couple more pieces of equipment, and you can see that for some of these equipments we have the mean time between failure and mean time to repair values in hours. And if there's no unscheduled maintenances that ever occurred on some equipments, then these will just be left blank. So these are performance indicators, like I said before, which may be useful to you. Next report would be this thing called cost time analysis, which, as the name implies, basically describes the amount of money that we spent and the amount of time that we spent on both preventive and unscheduled type of maintenances for each piece of equipment. And this is just, giving you some idea of what you're spending in terms of money as well as in terms of time on unscheduled maintenances and preventive maintenances. The efficiency report is kind of interesting. If you were to, for example, look at the month of May to, let's say, the month of June, so in other words a 2-month period, and we're going to give the system a grace period of 1 day. For example, what that means is if the equipment was due, let's say it's scheduled equipment, and it was due on June 15th, and we didn't get to it until June 16th, that's fine. It won't count as a bad thing, so to speak. But if you didn't get to it until June 17th, in other words 2 days later, then it would consider that as not being very efficient. So it's sort of a way of looking at how long it takes us to get to do what we have to do, either scheduled or unscheduled type of maintenances. In this case, we'll do scheduled. And if we're in that grace period of whatever you set here in days, then everything's fine. If you're beyond that grace period, if it takes you longer than the grace period, then it counts as not a bad thing, but not being able to sort of meet the desired time frame in which to maintain the piece of equipment. So if we go ahead and click on report now, here's our report, and we see that this piece of equipment, which was maintained, it was scheduled to be maintained on May 15th, and we actually did it a day early, so yeah, that's fine. It was on time. The same piece of equipment was also scheduled in June, on the 13th of June, but we didn't get to it until the 15th of June, so it's 2 days later. So that counts as not very good, and so it's not on time. See, it says no. Then there's another piece of equipment that was due on May 15th. We didn't get to it until May 17th, so it's 2 days later. So again, it's not on time. And so, if you have a lot of equipment, you can see whether we're able to get to the equipment on time or not through this efficiency report. And just as a summary, we have the number of transactions. There were 3. The total number of transactions that were on time, that was only 1 of them. So the percent on time, if you work out the numbers, is 33% roughly on time. Close that out. And now the next report, reason analysis. If you're doing unscheduled type of maintenances and you want to record what the reason for the unscheduled maintenance was, whether or not it's related to downtime reasons or repair reasons, but I think more than likely it'll be downtime reasons. It gives you a report of the number of times for unscheduled maintenances, for example, that you had as an example, clogged feed issues. So in this case, there were only one. How many times was there a problem with the pressure indicator? Again, one. And then for the others that we have listed here, there were 0. So these are all, by the way, preset by you, the user, in the area of the software where settings are made. These are not, something you have to sort of have in there, whether you like it or not. You would change these to whatever terminology is relevant to your company. In the next report, we didn't talk about spare parts, but there is an entire spare parts inventory system in the software if you want to use that. So you can set up the various spare parts, the number of parts you have in inventory, a threshold where you would want to start reordering. So for example, if you have a threshold of 10, then if you reach 9 parts in the inventory, it'll give you a report for reordering that particular part. And you can also have suppliers, like record the various suppliers for that part and the costs that each supplier has assigned to that particular part. And when you go to reorder, you go to the supplier screen, and you can call up the supplier or whatever you need to do to reorder that part. So as an example, if we click on the spare parts report and we go to the sub pull-down menu and we just look at the inventory in the system at the moment, here's what we've got for these various spare parts. And the current stock quantities are in this column, the minimum quantities are in this column. We're pretty good for most of these, except for the very last one. You can see that this particular part, we have 14 in stock and the minimum quantity is 15, so we've kind of gone past that threshold, and we would probably need to start reordering at least that particular part. And to do that, without actually going through that entire list, we have a report called Reorder, and that just displays all the parts where the threshold has been reached for quantity, and we would list those parts. So that's what's listed here. There's only one part actually that's listed here. So that pretty much summarizes the remaining reports, and we're not going to get into too much more detail. If you're interested in how to set up spare parts and how to set up suppliers and all the rest of that, that's documented really well in the user guide. And so thanks very much for watching this video, and have a good day.